In the fluorescent-lit corridors of St. Michael's Hospital, the steady beep of monitors created a familiar symphony that Dr. Ricardo had grown accustomed to over his 15 years of service. The autumn morning light filtered through the Venetian blinds, casting striped shadows across the worn linoleum floors. Nurse Sandra Martinez adjusted her crisp white uniform as she began her morning rounds, her comfortable shoes making soft squeaking sounds against the freshly waxed floor. The pediatric wing was quieter than usual this morning. Sandra's dark eyes scanned the patient charts as she moved from room to room, checking vitals and exchanging gentle words with the young patients who were already awake. Her last stop, as always, was room 412, where Miguel lay still and silent, as he had for the past year. The boy's small frame barely made an impression on the hospital bed. His olive skin had grown pale under the harsh hospital lights, but his thick black hair still fell across his forehead in unruly waves. Sandra brushed it back gently as she checked his vital signs, noting them in his chart with practiced efficiency. "Good morning, Miguel," she said softly, her voice carrying the warmth she reserved for her youngest patients. "The gardens are beautiful today. The maintenance crew planted those purple flowers you might like. What are they called?" "Ah, yes, lavender. They say it helps people relax." Sandra continued her gentle monologue as she adjusted Miguel's foredrip and checked his feeding tube. She had developed this habit shortly after Miguel arrived, believing somewhere in her heart that her words might reach him in whatever dark place his mind had retreated to. The doctors had been unable to identify Miguel's family, and the circumstances of his arrival remained shrouded in mystery. He had been found unconscious near the city limits, severely dehydrated and showing signs of physical trauma. The morning sun crept higher in the sky, warming the room despite the hospital's aggressive air conditioning. Sandra pulled the light blanket up to Miguel's chest, tucking it carefully around his shoulders. His face remained serene, unchanged, like a photograph frozen in time. "Dr. Parker is retiring next month," she continued, checking the monitors one last time. "They're throwing him a big party in the cafeteria. I remember how he would always bring those little chocolate bars for the children in the ward. He said a little sweetness goes a long way in medicine." She paused, studying Miguel's face for any sign of response, any flicker of movement beneath his closed eyelids. The steady rise and fall of his chest remained unchanged, the monitors continuing their monotonous beeping. Sandra sighed softly, allowing herself a moment of sadness for this unknown child who had become such a constant presence in her daily routine. "I'll be back later with your afternoon medications," she promised, her hand lingering briefly on his small shoulder. "Maybe I'll bring you one of those new books from the children's library. They just got a whole collection of adventure stories." As she turned to leave, a shaft of sunlight broke through the clouds outside, illuminating Miguel's face with a golden glow. For a moment, Sandra could almost imagine him as he might have been, a bright-eyed boy full of laughter and energy, running through playground adventures with friends his age. The image brought a lump to her throat. The day continued its predictable rhythm, a steady stream of patients flowing through the hospital's corridors. Dr. Ricardo made his rounds, his experienced eyes evaluating each case with careful consideration. The emergency room saw its usual mix of minor injuries and worried parents, while the surgery schedule proceeded with clockwork precision. Sandra's thoughts kept returning to Miguel throughout the day. Something about his case had touched her deeply from the beginning. Perhaps it was the mystery surrounding his arrival, or the complete absence of family members coming forward to claim him. Whatever the reason, she found herself drawn to his room again and again, checking on him more frequently than strictly necessary. As the afternoon light began to fade, Sandra made one final visit to room 412. The setting sun painted the walls in warm oranges and pinks, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere. She adjusted the blinds to shield Miguel's face from the direct light and began her evening routine of checking his vital signs. "The sunset is beautiful tonight," she told him, her voice soft in the quiet room. "The kind that makes the whole sky look like it's on fire. My grandmother used to say that sunsets like these were God's way of painting the world with hope." She reached for his hand to check his pulse, her fingers gentle against his wrist. And that's when she felt it, the slightest twitch of his index finger against her palm. Sandra froze, her heart suddenly racing. She watched intently, barely daring to breathe, as Miguel's finger moved again, a deliberate motion that sent shockwaves through her professional composure. The movement was subtle, barely perceptible, but to Sandra, who had watched over this still form for so many months, it might as well have been an earthquake. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the call button, her eyes never leaving Miguel's hand. "Dr. Ricardo," she called, trying to keep her voice steady. "Could you please come to room 412? Immediately." The minutes seemed to stretch endlessly as she waited, her eyes fixed on Miguel's hand, watching for any further movement. The regular beeping of the monitors continued unchanged, but something in the air felt different, charged with possibility. Dr. Ricardo arrived quickly, his white coat swishing as he entered the room, his dark eyebrows furrowed with concern as he took in Sandra's expression. "What is it, Nurse Martinez?" "His hand," Sandra said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He moved his finger. Twice. I was checking his pulse, and I felt it clearly." Dr. Ricardo moved to the bedside, his experienced hands carefully examining Miguel's limbs. He observed the boy's face intently, looking for any sign of consciousness. The room fell silent except for the steady rhythm of the monitors. "Are you certain?" he asked, his tone professional but kind. "Sometimes in these cases, we can imagine—" "I'm certain," Sandra interrupted, her voice firm despite her racing heart. "Dr. Ricardo, I've been caring for Miguel for a year. I know what I felt." The doctor nodded slowly, respecting her experience. He pulled out his penlight and carefully checked Miguel's pupil response. "I'll order a new set of tests," he said finally. "E.g., full neurological workup. We need to document any changes, no matter how small." Sandra felt a surge of gratitude for his willingness to take her observations seriously. She knew that in many cases, reported movements from coma patients turned out to be nothing more than wishful thinking on the part of caregivers. But something about this felt different. As Dr. Ricardo made notes in Miguel's chart, Sandra continued to watch the boy's face. In the fading light, she could almost imagine a slight tension around his eyes, as if he were trying to wake from a deep sleep. The next few days passed in a blur of increased monitoring and careful observation. Sandra found herself spending even more time in room 412, watching for any sign that might confirm her experience. The initial test showed no significant changes in Miguel's brain activity, but she refused to let her hope dim. It was during the quiet hours of a rainy afternoon when she noticed the next movement. Miguel's facial muscles twitched slightly, a barely perceptible movement that nonetheless caught her trained eye. She immediately documented the observation, adding it to the growing list of subtle changes she had noted. Dr. Ricardo remained cautiously optimistic, ordering additional tests and increasing the frequency of neurological examinations. The hospital staff began to take notice of the extra attention being paid to room 412, and rumors started to circulate about the possibility of the coma patient showing signs of awareness. Sandra maintained her daily routine of talking to Miguel, but now her words carried an extra weight of expectation. She found herself watching his face more intently, hoping to catch every slight movement or change in expression. "The children in the pediatric ward are preparing for their annual talent show," she told him one morning while changing his forebag. "Last year, little Sarah from room 415 sang Somewhere Over the Rainbow. She was so nervous, but everyone loved it. I think you would have enjoyed it, Miguel." As she spoke, she noticed his fingers moving again, this time in a more purposeful pattern. Her heart began to race as she watched the subtle movements, trying to discern any meaning in them. Something about the way his fingers twitched reminded her of writing motions. Acting on instinct, Sandra reached for a pen and a piece of paper from the bedside table. With gentle movements, she placed the pen in Miguel's hand, supporting his arm slightly. "Miguel," she said softly, "if you're trying to tell us something, we're here to listen." At first, nothing happened. The pen remained motionless in his loose grip, and Sandra began to doubt her intuition. But then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, Miguel's fingers tightened around the pen. The tip began to move across the paper, making faint, shaky marks. Sandra watched in amazement as the random marks gradually became more controlled. Over the course of several minutes, letters began to take shape, crude and wobbly, but unmistakably intentional. Her hands trembled as she supported his arm, helping to guide the movement while trying not to interfere with whatever message he was attempting to convey. The first word emerged slowly: help. Sandra's breath caught in her throat. She quickly pressed the call button, summoning Dr. Ricardo while continuing to support Miguel's hand as he struggled to form more letters. Dr. Ricardo arrived within minutes, his eyes widening as he took in the scene before him. Sandra showed him the paper with its shaky but legible word, and they watched together as Miguel continued his laborious writing. More words appeared. Others. Danger. Basement. The doctor and nurse exchanged concerned glances as the message continued to unfold. Miguel's hand moved with increasing urgency. Though his face remained unchanged, his eyes still closed. Warehouse. Red door. 12. The words came slowly, each letter a struggle, but the message was clear enough to send chills down Sandra's spine. She recognized the desperate plea of someone trying to save others from a fate he had barely escaped himself. Dr. Ricardo moved to the phone, his decision made. "I'm calling the police," he said quietly. "Whatever happened to this boy, it seems others might still be in danger." As they waited for the authorities to arrive, Miguel's hand continued its painful journey across the paper, adding details that would prove crucial in the hours to come. Park Street. Behind factory. Underground. Sandra held his hand steadily, her heart breaking for whatever horrors this young boy had witnessed. The room fell silent, except for the scratch of pen against paper and the eternal beeping of monitors. The police arrived within the hour, two plainclothes detectives who listened with professional interest as Dr. Ricardo explained the situation. They examined the paper with Miguel's message, their expressions growing grave as they read the words. "We'll need to keep this as evidence," the senior detective said, carefully placing the paper in an evidence bag. "And we'll need to ask some questions about when you first noticed changes in the patient's condition." As Sandra recounted the events of the past few days, she kept one hand on Miguel's arm, offering whatever comfort she could. His fingers had finally stilled, the pen lying loose in his grip, but she could sense a tension in his body that hadn't been there before. The detectives took detailed notes and made several phone calls. Within hours, a full investigation was launched, with officers being dispatched to the location described in Miguel's message. Sandra and Dr. Ricardo waited anxiously for news, knowing that somewhere in the city, Miguel's cryptic warnings might be leading authorities to others in desperate need of help. The hospital corridor outside room 412 became a hub of activity as detectives came and went, consulting with Dr. Ricardo about Miguel's condition and any additional messages he might have managed to convey. Sandra maintained her vigil, watching for any sign that he might have more to tell them. As night fell, the first reports began to come in. The police had located a warehouse matching Miguel's description, its red door barely visible behind years of neglect and overgrown vegetation. What they found inside would haunt them for years to come. The basement, accessed through a hidden entrance, contained evidence of long-term captivity, small rooms with locked doors, basic provisions, and personal items that suggested the presence of multiple children. The scene painted a picture of systematic abuse and confinement that made Sandra's blood run cold. But the rooms were empty. Recent signs of habitation suggested that whoever had been keeping children there had moved them, perhaps spooked by Miguel's escape a year ago. The police expanded their search, following additional clues found at the warehouse. Sandra relayed this information to Miguel in soft tones, hoping that somewhere in his unconscious state, he could understand that his message had been received, that help was on the way. His hand twitched again, and she quickly provided the pen and paper. New words appeared, slower but more urgent. Second place. Tunnel. Follow pipes. The message was immediately relayed to the investigation team. Hours passed in tense waiting, with Sandra refusing to leave Miguel's side despite the end of her shift. Dr. Ricardo arranged for another nurse to cover her other duties, understanding the importance of maintaining this critical line of communication. Just past midnight, the breakthrough came. Following Miguel's latest directions, police discovered a network of underground tunnels connecting the warehouse to a second location. And there, in rooms hidden beneath an abandoned factory, they found them. 7 children, aged between 8 and 13, malnourished and traumatized but alive. The news reached the hospital in waves of activity. First the police confirmation, then the arrival of ambulances carrying the rescued children. Sandra watched from Miguel's room as the pediatric wing filled with medical teams working to assess and treat the new arrivals. The children's stories began to emerge as they received medical care. They spoke of their captivity, of fear and darkness, but also of a boy named Miguel who had helped them survive. He had shared his food with the youngest ones, told them stories to keep their spirits up, and finally attempted an escape that he hoped would bring help to the others. One of the older girls, Sarah, asked to see Miguel. When she was finally allowed into his room, her reaction confirmed what they had begun to suspect. "That's him," she said, tears streaming down her face. "He promised he'd find a way to help us. He promised he wouldn't forget." Sandra stood by the bed, her own eyes filling with tears as she watched Sarah gently take Miguel's hand. The monitor showed a slight increase in his heart rate, the first significant change in his vital signs since he had begun writing his messages. Over the next few days, as the rescued children began their long journey toward recovery, more details of their ordeal came to light. Miguel had been among the oldest of the captives, and he had taken it upon himself to protect the younger ones. His escape attempt had been planned carefully, but something had gone wrong. The children knew only that he had been caught and hurt badly while trying to get away. Sandra continued her vigil, talking to Miguel about the children he had saved, telling him of their progress and their gratitude. She described how they were receiving proper medical care, how their families had been contacted, how they would never have to fear the dark basement rooms again. One morning, as sunlight once again filled room 412, Sandra noticed something different about Miguel's face. A slight upward curve of his lips, the ghost of a smile. She was recording his vital signs when she noticed another change. His heart rate was dropping. "Dr. Ricardo," she called out, her voice urgent. The doctor rushed in, quickly assessing the situation. Miguel's vital signs were declining rapidly, his body beginning to shut down after its tremendous effort to communicate its vital message. The rescued children were brought to say goodbye, gathering around his bed with tears and whispered thanks. Sarah held his hand, telling him that they were safe now, that he could rest. Sandra watched as Miguel's face relaxed, the tension finally leaving his features as his heart rate continued to slow. In his final moments, Miguel's hand moved one last time, forming 2 shaky words on the paper Sandra had quickly provided. "Thank you." The monitor flatlined at 2:47 p.m. on a sunny afternoon, its steady tone marking the end of Miguel's journey. Sandra stood with the children as Dr. Ricardo pronounced the time of death, her heart both heavy with loss and filled with profound respect for the brave boy who had never given up on saving his friends. In the days that followed, as the story spread through various channels, more details about Miguel's background emerged. His family was finally located. They had been searching for him for over a year, their missing person reports somehow lost in a system that had failed them. They arrived at the hospital too late to see him alive, but in time to learn of his extraordinary courage and sacrifice. Sandra attended Miguel's funeral, standing with the rescued children and their families as they paid their respects to the boy who had saved them. The cemetery was filled with flowers, many of them brought by hospital staff who had come to know Miguel's story. Back at St. Michael's Hospital, room 412 remained empty for several days, as if the building itself was paying its respects. When it was finally assigned to a new patient, Sandra hung a small plaque beside the door, a simple inscription that read, "In memory of Miguel, who showed us that courage knows no bounds." The garden outside room 412 continued to bloom, season after season, its flowers reaching toward the sun just as Miguel had reached through the darkness of his coma to save those he had protected. Each petal that unfurled in the morning light seemed to carry a whisper of his story, a testament to the extraordinary power of one child's determination to protect others. Visitors to the hospital often paused by the garden, drawn by its careful arrangement and the peaceful atmosphere it emanated. Many didn't know its significance until they noticed the small bronze plaque nestled among the lavender. Miguel's Garden, where hope blooms eternal. The hospital volunteers who tended the space had developed a tradition of sharing Miguel's story with anyone who asked about the plaque, ensuring that his legacy continued to inspire. As years passed, the garden became more than just a memorial. It transformed into a sanctuary for patients, families, and staff alike. Young patients from the pediatric ward would sit among the flowers during their physical therapy sessions, drawing strength from the beauty around them. Parents found solace in its quiet corners during long hours of waiting. Medical students would gather there during breaks, discussing cases and sharing their aspirations to make a difference in their patients' lives. The rescued children, now adults with families of their own, made annual pilgrimages to the garden. They brought their children, who grew up knowing the story of Uncle Miguel, the brave boy who had saved their parents. These children learned early lessons about courage, sacrifice, and the enduring power of kindness through the stories told in this special place. Sarah's daughter, whom she named Miguela in honor of her savior, showed a particular affinity for the garden. At 7 years old, she would spend hours helping the volunteers tend to the plants, learning the names and care requirements of each flower. She inherited her mother's gift for storytelling and would often gather other children to share tales of the garden's namesake, adding her own imaginative flourishes while staying true to the heart of Miguel's sacrifice. The garden's influence extended beyond the hospital grounds. Local schools began incorporating its story into their character education programs, bringing students for field trips to learn about courage, compassion, and the importance of standing up for others. The children would leave with seeds from the garden, encouraged to plant their own reminders of Miguel's legacy in their school or home gardens. Botanical experts who visited noted how the garden seemed to thrive beyond normal expectations. Plants that typically struggled in the local climate flourished there, and the blooming season stretched longer than usual. Some attributed this to the careful attention of the volunteers, while others, particularly those who knew Miguel's story, sensed something more profound at work, as if the garden itself had become a living embodiment of the hope he had nurtured in the darkest of places. Sandra, though retired from nursing, continued to visit the garden regularly. She found peace in tending to the plants, remembering the quiet moments she had spent talking to Miguel about these same flowers years ago. Her experienced hands worked the soil with gentle purpose, just as they had once cared for the boy who had changed so many lives. The garden became a focal point for community events and ceremonies. Each spring, the Miguel Rodriguez Foundation held its annual fundraising gala there, gathering supporters under twinkling lights strung between the trees. The foundation had grown significantly, expanding its support for child trafficking survivors and funding research into trauma recovery. The garden served as a powerful reminder of why their work mattered. Local artists found inspiration in the space, creating paintings, sculptures, and poetry that captured its spirit. A renowned composer wrote a piece titled Miguel's Garden, which premiered at a benefit concert for the foundation. The music captured both the solemnity of Miguel's sacrifice and the joy of the lives he had saved, becoming a favorite of the local symphony's repertoire. As the garden matured, it developed its own unique ecosystem. Butterflies danced between the flowers, their delicate wings catching the sunlight. Birds nested in the small trees that had been planted along its borders. Even in winter, when most gardens lay dormant, Miguel's garden maintained a quiet vitality, with evergreen plants and winter-blooming flowers providing constant reminders of life's persistence. The hospital's architectural plans began incorporating elements inspired by the garden. New wings were designed with healing gardens of their own, each one paying subtle homage to the original outside room, 412. The hospital's reputation for compassionate care grew, attracting patients and medical professionals who valued the human element in healing. On quiet evenings, when the day's activities had settled and the garden was bathed in twilight, visitors sometimes reported feeling a special kind of peace there. It was as if the space held not just memories of Miguel's sacrifice, but also echoes of the countless stories of hope, healing, and human connection that had unfolded there over the years. The garden's plants continued their cycle of growth and renewal, each season bringing new blooms while maintaining the strength of established roots. Like the story it commemorated, the garden demonstrated how a single act of courage could create ripples of positive change that extended far beyond its original moment, touching lives across generations with its message of hope and resilience. Researchers studying the psychological benefits of therapeutic gardens often cited Miguel's garden as a prime example of how memorial spaces could promote healing and community connection. They noted how the combination of natural beauty and meaningful narrative created an environment particularly conducive to emotional and physical recovery. As decades passed, the garden evolved while maintaining its essential character. New plants were thoughtfully added, while the original specimens were carefully tended and preserved. Each addition was chosen to complement the existing design, while adding its own unique contribution to the garden's story, much like the growing number of lives touched by Miguel's legacy. The garden became known as a place where miracles, both large and small, seemed to occur with unusual frequency. Patients would report breakthrough moments in their recovery while sitting among its flowers. Families found reconciliation in its peaceful atmosphere. Medical professionals discovered new inspiration for their work while walking its paths. In this way, the garden outside room 412 became more than just a memorial to a brave boy's sacrifice. It transformed into a living testament to the enduring power of human kindness, a place where hope continued to bloom eternal, nourished by the memory of a child who had reached through darkness to bring others into light. The garden's influence spread beyond its physical boundaries, touching lives in ways that seemed to multiply with each passing season. Local schools began incorporating regular visits to the garden into their curriculum, teaching students about resilience and compassion through Miguel's story. Children would sit among the flowers, writing poetry and stories inspired by the peaceful atmosphere. Many of these young visitors would return years later as adults, bringing their own children to learn about the brave boy who had saved so many lives. The garden's reputation grew internationally, attracting visitors from around the world who sought to understand how a hospital garden could become such a powerful symbol of hope. Documentary filmmakers captured its changing seasons, interviewing the survivors who had known Miguel and the countless others whose lives had been touched by his story. These documentaries became teaching tools in medical schools, helping future healthcare providers understand the profound impact of compassionate care. The Miguel Rodriguez Foundation expanded its reach, establishing similar therapeutic gardens at hospitals and rehabilitation centers worldwide. Each new garden incorporated elements from the original, creating a network of healing spaces that shared Miguel's spirit of protection and hope. These gardens became known as Miguel's Havens, each one carefully designed to provide comfort and inspiration to those facing their own battles. Scientific studies began documenting unusual phenomena within the garden. Plants exhibited accelerated healing properties, and patients who spent time there showed measurably improved recovery rates. While skeptics sought rational explanations, many believed that Miguel's extraordinary spirit continued to influence the space, creating an environment where healing seemed to transcend ordinary medical expectations. The garden's influence extended into the arts community, inspiring a series of works that captured its essence. Painters set up easels among the flowers, attempting to capture the interplay of light and shadow that seemed uniquely beautiful there. Musicians composed pieces that echoed the garden's peaceful atmosphere, creating soundscapes that therapeutic programs around the world began using in their treatment protocols. The survivors whom Miguel had protected, now entering their golden years, continued to gather in the garden annually. Their children and grandchildren joined them, creating a living chain of memory that connected generations. These gatherings became celebrations of life, marking not just their rescue, but the countless ways their lives had bloomed in the years since, much like the garden itself. Sarah, now a grandmother, established a storytelling tradition in the garden. Every Sunday afternoon, she would gather with anyone who wished to listen, sharing not just Miguel's story, but the ongoing tales of hope and healing that the garden had witnessed over the decades. Her stories captured the attention of literary scholars who began studying how oral traditions could preserve and transmit messages of hope across generations. The garden's design evolved to incorporate new elements while maintaining its core character. A small pond was added, its surface reflecting the sky and surrounding flowers, creating a meditation space where visitors could find moments of peace. The sound of flowing water added another dimension to the garden's sensory experience, its gentle music providing a backdrop for contemplation and healing. Research teams from various disciplines, botany, psychology, architecture, and medical science, collaborated on studies of the garden's unique properties. They documented how its design and history created an environment that seemed to accelerate both physical and emotional healing. Their findings led to new approaches in hospital design and therapeutic landscaping worldwide. The garden became a symbol of hope during times of community crisis. When natural disasters struck or tragic events shook the community, people naturally gathered there, finding strength in its peaceful atmosphere and the story it represented. Emergency response teams began incorporating visits to the garden into their protocols for helping survivors process trauma and begin healing. As technology advanced, virtual reality programs were developed to bring the garden's healing presence to those who couldn't visit in person. These programs, carefully designed to capture every detail of the space, allowed hospital patients worldwide to experience its calming atmosphere. The virtual garden became particularly valuable during global health crises when physical access to healing spaces was limited. The garden's soil seemed to possess unique properties, nurturing plants that struggled elsewhere. Researchers studying samples found unusual microbial communities that appeared to enhance plant growth and resilience. These discoveries led to new developments in therapeutic horticulture and environmental restoration projects. Local artists worked with hospital staff to create seasonal installations that complemented the garden's natural beauty while honoring Miguel's memory. These installations often incorporated elements from the children's stories about their time with Miguel, transforming their memories into visual poetry that touched visitors' hearts. The garden's influence on medical education grew as new generations of healthcare providers trained at the hospital. Medical students would often spend time there during their rotations, learning how the integration of natural spaces and patient care could enhance healing outcomes. Many reported that their time in the garden helped them maintain their compassion and sense of purpose during challenging moments in their careers. As the world faced increasing environmental challenges, the garden became a model for sustainable urban spaces that combined ecological and therapeutic benefits. Its design demonstrated how small spaces could create significant positive impacts on both human and environmental health, inspiring similar projects in cities around the world. The garden's legacy continued to grow through the stories of those it touched. Patients who found strength among its flowers, families who found peace in its quiet corners, and healthcare providers who renewed their sense of purpose in its peaceful atmosphere. Each person who visited carried away a piece of its magic, spreading Miguel's message of hope and courage far beyond the hospital grounds. Annual candlelight vigils held in the garden brought together survivors of trauma from around the world, creating a global community of healing and support. These gatherings became powerful demonstrations of how one child's courage could create ripples of positive change that continued to spread across time and distance, touching countless lives with their message of hope and resilience. Each year, the vigils grew larger, attracting people from different cultures and backgrounds, all united by their connection to Miguel's story and its enduring message of hope. The ceremony began at sunset, as hundreds of candles were lit one by one, their flames dancing in the evening breeze. Survivors shared their stories in multiple languages, their words translated and carried across the garden like whispers of healing. Children of the original survivors, now adults with their own families, led songs of remembrance and hope that had been composed specifically for these gatherings. The vigils evolved into international events, broadcast live across the globe, allowing countless others to participate virtually in this powerful demonstration of collective healing. Social media platforms lit up with millions of virtual candles, as people from every corner of the world shared their own stories of survival and transformation, inspired by Miguel's legacy. Throughout the year, the garden hosted smaller, more intimate ceremonies marking personal milestones in survivors' journeys. These quiet celebrations became known as Miguel's Moments, where individuals could commemorate their own victories over trauma and darkness. The garden's peaceful atmosphere seemed to deepen during these private ceremonies, as if acknowledging the profound significance of each personal triumph. The foundation established a scholarship program for survivors pursuing careers in healing professions, medicine, psychology, social work, and therapeutic horticulture. Recipients of the Miguel's Light Scholarship carried forward his spirit of protection and care, creating a growing network of trauma-informed professionals who understood firsthand the importance of compassionate support in the healing process. Research into the garden's unique properties continued to yield surprising results. Scientists documented unusual patterns in plant growth and healing rates that defied conventional explanation. Some theorized that the concentrated positive energy from years of healing and hope had created a unique bioenergetic environment. Others suggested that the powerful emotional resonance of Miguel's story had somehow influenced the physical space in ways that science was only beginning to understand. The garden's influence reached into unexpected areas of society. Urban planners began incorporating elements of its design into public spaces, creating pocket sanctuaries in busy cities where people could find moments of peace and connection. These small gardens, each bearing a subtle tribute to Miguel's story, became vital resources in communities dealing with collective trauma or stress. Healthcare facilities worldwide began adopting protocols developed in Miguel's garden, integrating therapeutic landscaping and storytelling into their treatment programs. The Miguel Protocol became recognized as a powerful approach to trauma recovery, combining elements of nature therapy, narrative medicine, and community support. Artists continued to find inspiration in the garden's atmosphere, creating works that captured its essence of healing and hope. A renowned sculptor created a series of installations that traveled to museums worldwide, each piece incorporating elements from the garden and Miguel's story. These exhibitions became gathering places for local healing communities, extending the garden's influence far beyond its physical boundaries. The garden's role in medical education expanded as universities developed programs studying the intersection of narrative medicine, environmental psychology, and trauma recovery. Medical students from around the world completed rotations at the hospital, spending time in the garden learning how to integrate compassionate care with clinical expertise. Digital technology enhanced the garden's reach through virtual reality experiences that captured not just its physical beauty, but also its emotional resonance. These programs became valuable tools in trauma recovery programs, allowing people in remote locations to benefit from the garden's healing atmosphere. Artificial intelligence programs analyzed thousands of recovery stories associated with the garden, identifying patterns that helped improve trauma treatment protocols worldwide. The garden soil continued to demonstrate unusual properties, nurturing plants that thrived beyond normal expectations. Researchers studying these phenomena discovered unique microbiological communities that seemed to enhance both plant growth and human immune response. These findings led to new developments in biotherapy and environmental restoration, as scientists worked to understand and replicate the garden's extraordinary healing environment. During times of global crisis, the garden became a symbol of resilience and hope. Virtual gatherings allowed people worldwide to connect with its peaceful atmosphere, finding strength in Miguel's story and the countless tales of healing that had unfolded there. These digital connections created a global network of support, demonstrating how one small garden could help heal wounds across continents and cultures. The garden's original flora matured into remarkable specimens, their growth patterns defying conventional botanical understanding. Some plants exhibited unusual adaptations that enhanced their therapeutic properties, leading to new discoveries in medicinal botany. These findings suggested that the garden had evolved into a unique ecosystem, shaped by years of interaction with human healing and hope. As climate change presented new challenges, the garden demonstrated remarkable resilience, adapting to changing conditions while maintaining its therapeutic properties. Environmental scientists studied its adaptive strategies, learning lessons that could help protect other healing spaces around the world. The garden became a model for sustainable therapeutic landscapes, showing how natural spaces could maintain their healing power even in the face of environmental challenges. Local communities developed programs that brought at-risk youth to work in the garden, learning skills while experiencing its healing atmosphere. Many of these young people found direction and purpose through their connection to the space, some going on to careers in therapeutic horticulture or trauma recovery. Their success stories added new chapters to the garden's legacy of transformation and hope. The annual vigils continued to grow, evolving into international celebrations of healing and resilience. Each year brought new stories of lives touched by Miguel's legacy, as the ripples of his courage continued to spread outward, touching lives across generations and borders. The garden remained at the heart of this growing movement, a living testament to the power of one child's sacrifice to create endless waves of healing and hope.